If you guys love Bad Day HQ, don't forget to check out Good Day HQ, available at youtube.com/gooddayhq. It features the best in reality television, travel shows, and just general fun stuff to bring a smile to your day.
Born in the last decade of the 1800s, the motion picture quickly becomes the major art form of the 20th century. Like today, the cinema provides early audiences with an avenue of escape from the realities of everyday life. But sometimes, even a night at the movies can't escape the crushing reality of disaster, especially when it comes suddenly, without warning. Saturday, January 28, 1922. The city of Washington, D.C. is in the grips of the worst snowstorm in its history.
The city was practically shut down. It was snowing so much. I believe it was in excess of 2 feet of snow. And it was kind of a joyful mood in the city. People were having fun. There was no transportation, nothing could move.
There are those, however, who brave the elements for a night on the town. 19-year-old Agnes Mellon and her fiancé Jack McKimmey stopped to invite her sister and 5-year-old nephew to join them. Her sister declines, afraid that the wintry weather will aggravate her son's cold. 29-year-old war veteran Scott Montgomery is also out tonight, unwilling to cancel his date with his companion, Veronica Murphy. Both couples are on their way to see the new double bill at the Knickerbocker Theatre, the city's largest and most modern moving picture theater.
Movie theaters had started out maybe 15 years before. They were pretty new in the early 20s. People were coming to movies in greater and greater numbers. A lot of these local people who were building movie theaters said, we can build bigger and better movie theaters. We can make them palatial.
The Knickerbocker certainly fits that description. Completed in 1917, it is owned by local entrepreneur Harry Crandall.
He had started out back around 1906, 1907, in that area, with a very tiny theater in downtown Washington. And finally had a circuit, a small circuit of a number of theaters scattered fairly strategically throughout the city. So he made a lot of money. He was doing very well.
So is up-and-coming architect Reginald Geare, who has designed several of Harry Crandall's movie palaces, including the Knickerbocker.
He wasn't the most illustrious motion picture theater architect at the time, and of course, when the Knickerbocker opened, he was, really hailed. I mean, this is a wonderful new design, and he was really at the peak of his career with the Knickerbocker Theatre.
The Knickerbocker Theatre was kind of in the suburbs. It was out of the downtown area. It was one of the biggest neighborhood theaters. The Knickerbocker Theatre was located on I describe it as a peninsula of land between two major streets. 18th Street was on the east side of it. And one side of it was straight, very straight shot where the entrance was. The other side was on a road that curved slightly.
This was a shell of clay which had a good structural characteristic, but was not as strong or as heavy as a brick, and so therefore was a lot cheaper to build with. The rest of the structure was of structural steel, reinforced concrete roof and slabs. This structural steel was required in order to span the large openings required for a theater.
The structure of the theater, however, is of little concern to the 300 neighborhood residents inside the Knickerbocker at 9 o'clock that night, looking forward to the second feature of the evening double bill. William and Eloise Crocker are enjoying a break from William's studies. William is a student of economics at Georgetown University, and he and Eloise have been married just 5 months. The entire Canston family sits together in the balcony. Oscar and Mabel Canston have recently moved to Washington from Chicago with their son Grant and daughters Dorothy and Olin. With sound films still 5 years away, the Knickerbocker has its own orchestra at the front of the auditorium just under the screen.
Of course, theater orchestras were a vital part of silent movies.
First violinist Joseph Beale is still on his honeymoon after marrying his childhood sweetheart just 4 days earlier. Beside him, second violinist Oreste Natillo is part of a musical family that emigrated from Naples in the late 19th century. His older brother Ernesto is the much-respected conductor of the Knickerbocker Orchestra.
My great-uncle was making a good living as an orchestra leader and conductor and publisher and writer of music. He was helping to support his sister's family because his sister had lost her husband early.
While Ernesto Natillo's orchestra entertains patrons during the evening intermission, the storm outside continues to blow. Those inside the Knickerbocker are unaware that heavy, wet snow accumulating on the roof above is adding stress to the theater's unique structure, a structure weakened by changes made to the original design during construction.
The structural engineer who did the redesign substituted lightweight trusses of steel for the heavy structural steel members. This was required because of the shortage of steel in the First World War, and also to accelerate progress on construction. The architect agreed to this change, subject to approval by the Washington Building Department. However, the architect never recalculated the loads and checked them, nor did he check the structural design, nor call upon the original structural engineer to check the design.
As the theater sat in the summer's heat, it gets really hot here in the summers, the bricks would expand slightly and they'd move out a little bit. As the weather cooled down, the bricks would contract and move back, but not quite into their original position. As the theater expanded slightly, that meant that less and less of the beam was resting on a solid wall.
Now, on January 28, 1922, the extreme winter weather is adding to the stress from above.
By that night, there was maybe 2 feet of snow on the Knickerbocker's roof, which exerted a tremendous weight on the roof. You know, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of pounds.
It is just after 9 p.m. Conductor Ernesto Natillo's wife, Mary, watches her husband as the orchestra prepares to play accompaniment to the second feature. With her is Vincent Dauber, the 9-year-old son of family friends.
They were living in an era of great progress in America, great opportunity, so everything was going good for them. Life was great, but in a moment, unexpectedly, everything just changed.
Saturday, January 28, 1922. At the Knickerbocker Theatre in Washington, D.C., the main feature is about to begin. Suddenly, a noise pierces the interior of the auditorium. To some, it sounds like a heaving groan. To others, the whine of a bullet whistling through the air. Retired mine manager W.H. Morris instinctively heads for the exit. What he hears is similar to the tearing sound a coal mine makes just before it collapses.
The coal miner was in the 8th row, looked back and saw plaster over the head of the conductor.
As the ceiling splits down the middle, some patrons try to find cover or run for the door, but there is no time.
When the theater roof was subjected to this tremendous weight of snow, the end of the beam that was resting on the curved wall was so close to the edge that it just simply slipped off. And that brought that main beam down, and everything else came down with it.
It's as if the whole world is caving in as steel, brick, and concrete crash down from above. Coal miner W.H. Morris reaches the exit in the nick of time.
The force of the collapse that moved the air forced him out of the main auditorium and into the lobby. But he was able to get there from there out to the street and without a scratch.
In their booth at the back of the building, the projectionists feel the same blast of air.
The projection booth was built outside of the auditorium so that the projectionists had no idea what it could have been. They looked out of the portholes where the projectors projected and see the sky. The entire ceiling came down. It fell, first of all, onto the balcony. The balcony wasn't strong enough to support it, so the balcony then fell onto the people in the audience.
19-year-old Agnes Mellon and her fiancé, Jack McKimmey, are killed instantly, crushed by falling concrete. Not far away, 8-year-old Grant Canston feels the balcony crash around him, taking his parents and 2 sisters with it.
He watched them go to their death in the balcony. He watched it collapse, and he managed to get out alive.
5 members of the orchestra are killed instantly, including first violinist Joseph Beal.
One of the girders that fell struck my great uncle in the left shoulder and severed his arm from his body. My grandfather broke his leg and also had his right arm severed from the elbow down.
The thunder of collapsing concrete and steel is over in minutes. Within the twisted wreckage of the theater, those who have survived the collapse now await rescue as precious minutes tick by. On the street outside, very little looks changed.
I can remember the scene of the theater. Of course, the roof had collapsed in, and the whole interior was covered with snow.
News of the tragedy spreads quickly, and rescue operations are soon underway to save the hundreds trapped in their seats.
There were not enough tools available for rescue work. So people were breaking into cars that were parked along the street, breaking into cars, getting the jacks out of them so that they could use the jacks to raise up slabs of concrete.
Neighborhood doctors arrive to help, including radiologist Dr. Joseph Elward.
My father had graduated from medical school in 1919 from Georgetown University, and he happened to have been visiting a patient in the area of the Knickerbocker Theatre, and I guess he heard the collapse and ran to the scene.
Dr. Elward's first patient is a young man who begs him not to cut off his arm, unaware that it has already been torn from his shoulder and lost in the wreckage. Rescue workers must chisel their way through 2 layers of debris, first the roof, then the balcony underneath.
They discovered people dead, sitting in their seats next to other people who, were able to survive. In some cases, the steel girders, had crushed someone or made it impossible for them to get out of their seat.
The most difficult task is keeping the injured alive until they can be cut free. A small boy delivers painkillers to casualties by slithering through the maze of metal and mortar. City hospitals are soon filled with the injured. A nearby church becomes a morgue for those it is too late to save. Student William Crocker is one of them, killed while his wife survives uninjured in the seat beside him. Eloise Crocker refuses to leave him, holding his hand until his body is removed a few hours later. War veteran Scott Montgomery urges rescuers to help companion Veronica Murphy and those around him, despite his own severe injuries. But Veronica is already dead, her arm across him in a final embrace. Doctors must finally break that arm before Scott can be freed. He later dies in hospital. Carl Dauber finds the hand of his 9-year-old son Vincent protruding from the debris, but it will be hours before the boy's body can be removed. Mary Natillo, who brought Vincent to the movies that night, survives, but her husband Ernesto does not.
He did survive the initial impact, but he did not live much longer.
For many of those who do survive, it is pure luck that saves them.
The people under the balcony in the rear of the theater, they're the ones that survived because the collapse of the roof onto the balcony gave them a couple of extra seconds to get out of the theater.
Some 300 people have braved the wintry weather to come to the Knickerbocker Theatre that evening. Now, 133 of them are injured, many very severely. For another 98, a night at the movies has become the last night of their lives. January 28, 1922. In Washington, D.C., the roof of the Knickerbocker Theatre has suddenly collapsed on those inside. Many of the patrons injured or killed are residents of the very neighborhood in which the theater was built.
I can remember vividly, on Calvin Street, the street that I lived on, the hearse, and there were horse-drawn hearses, were standing outside of at least 3 or possibly 4 homes simultaneously, perhaps a day or 2 after the disaster.
Several inquiries are organized within days of the disaster. The failure of the main roof truss attached to the hollow north wall is attributed to the changes in the original design and by the architect's failure to recheck the loads following those changes.
We have a number of conditions which tend to pyramid here. We have a design which was light. We have weather condition which brought on an estimated load which was much heavier than what it was designed for. Beyond that, we have the condition of the steel, where the steel was not attached or fixed to the wall and may have been displaced to some extent there.
Even if there hadn't been a snowfall, that building was probably doomed for some kind of a catastrophe like that because structurally it wasn't sound.
For a time, the ghostly remains of the Knickerbocker stand as a grim memorial to those who died that wintry night in January, until owner Harry Crandall constructs a new theater at the same location.
The walls were rebuilt into another theater so that the theater, which was called the Ambassador, which existed for maybe 40 or 50 years after the Knickerbocker disaster, still had the original walls of the Knickerbocker.
Crandall was responsible for building it, but he brought in another architect, Thomas W. Lamb, who was a major, probably the major motion picture theater architect at the time.
For Reginald Geare, the architect Lamb replaces, life is never the same.
Although he was acquitted of any culpability in the disaster as far as his design, I think he always felt personally responsible.
While Harry Crandall's theater business thrives throughout the 1920s, he loses millions in the stock market crash of 1929. The tragedy at the Knickerbocker also changes the life of Oreste Natilo, who not only loses his older brother Ernesto, but his own cherished career.
After that, he was never able to play instrument again.
Although a night at the movies is still one of our most popular forms of entertainment, the great moving picture palaces of the 1920s are long gone. But for some, the legacy of the Knickerbocker Theatre will always remain.
We remember the Knickerbocker Theatre collapse as being the point at which it became necessary for engineering practice and architectural practice to be responsibly regulated. Many states now, they are requiring continuing education to be carried out each year after persons have been licensed for a number of years so that their education will not become stale.
When people in my generation were small, their parents were often saying, well, it's snowing tonight, you better not go to the movies. They remembered, even if they didn't know the exact details, they remembered this collapse and that it was caused by snow.
It should be memorialized. It isn't. There's no memorial to the Knickerbocker that I know of in Washington. It was a neighborhood disaster. When I looked at the newspapers, a week later they were talking about something else. Life goes on.
If you guys are preparing for the apocalypse or want to survive a disaster or just want to have a really awesome camping trip, check out the products we have in the links below. Just by shopping for these products, you help support Bad Day HQ. In fact, any shopping you do in Amazon while going through these links will actually help us produce more great content for you guys.